photo is just a photo, right? Well, not always. Welcome to the Is That Really Photography podcast, where we investigate and celebrate the lesser known aspects of photography, photographic art, and the fun which can be had when you step away from the mainstream into the wonderful world of alternative photography. I'm Mara Robinson, and today I'm talking with Roberto Aguilar about his long photographic career and his love affair with alternative printing processes, especially platinum palladium, on this week's episode of the Is That Really Photography podcast. I started by asking how and why he got into photography.
I started photography, I think I must have been about 9 years old when I first realized that if you take out a piece of film from the roll, it doesn't look like a negative. I thought, well, how does it get from this piece of opaque plastic into a negative where I can make large prints? And that question is what brought me into the darkroom. And there was a small photography club, and we're talking in El Salvador, we're talking in the mid 70s. And it was the magic of the darkroom that kind of got me into photography. I didn't even have a camera. It was my parents' pictures that they had taken. And if I liked the picture, I wanted to take that negative and maybe make a print. And then I realized how difficult it is to actually make a print from a negative. It really got me going into wanting to find out more about photography. And so at this time, in the late 70s, we moved to Miami because there was a political unrest in El Salvador. So I got my father to buy me a camera. I loved it. I got into the photography club in my high school in America, in the US. I started taking some pictures for fun for the yearbook, newspaper, graduated from high school in Miami, went to university in Washington, D.C., the American University. I started studying photography. It was a degree in communications with a concentration in photography photojournalism. So I became the photography editor for the newspaper at the university, and I was in charge of about 15 photographers, giving them an assignment, in charge of the budgets and running the darkroom for the newspaper. Also, the only reason I'm mentioning this is because it kind of was a precursor to what I do now as well. I had to create from the photographs that we printed for the assignments, I had to create camera-ready artwork for the newspapers. Funny enough, when about 10 years ago, when I got into the alternative processes, I realized that it was a combination of darkroom photography and some repro work. So getting ready, camera-ready artwork to create the negatives that we use today for platinum palladium printing. And all those three aspects became quite important, almost like as important as each other. It's almost like a triangle for me. If you can get those three aspects, you will be able to create a handmade print, whether it's platinum, cyanotype, Van Dyke Brown, salt print. And so this is kind of how I got into photography. Later on, after I graduated from Washington, D.C., I started assisting a photographer. I couldn't get into photojournalism. I tried, and the best I could do was to be a stringer photographer. And I was like, well, I can't really live off being a stringer photographer. So I started assisting a fashion photographer. And I thought fashion photography was it was the complete opposite of photojournalism. Because in photojournalism, I carried 2 camera bodies, a few lenses, different speed films, and you had to be ready for whatever happened. In fashion, you had control of everything. You could even stop the shoot because the light wasn't right, and you said, look, the sun's gone out now. And that kind of excited me a little bit, in that you can do anything you want. Although the photographer I was assisting was mostly doing catalog work, which is really commercial work. I probably learned more from him working with him 6 months that I did in 4 years of university. I can't stress that enough. If you want to get into photography, assist, because every day working in photography, you will learn a lot more than if you just take a course, okay? And so if you really want to get into it, do assist some photographers, do assist some artists to get yourself in the everyday hustle and bustle, and how to deal with clients, how to deal with models if you're using models. After that, my parents had moved back to El Salvador. So they were saying to me, either you get a job or you move back to El Salvador with us. And at that point, I wasn't really willing to move back to El Salvador. So I literally opened up the newspaper and started looking for jobs. One of the jobs I found was a delivery boy for an art studio right around the corner from where I live. So I applied, and the man looked at me and said, dude, well, you're very overqualified for what we're looking for, but if you want the job, it's yours. So my job entailed basically taking artwork or picking up artwork from clients, taking it to presses, and the not so fun stuff. I used to do everything from taking out the garbage to cleaning bathrooms for the studio. But it was at this studio that I started to learn Photoshop, because we were the first studio in Miami to be using what's called composed film for the press, for printing. And so there was 4 or 5 artists that would sit in front of the computers using programs like Quark Express and Photoshop. And at 5 o'clock, when the job was over, a lot of them were still there. So I would sometimes sit in front of the computer and ask them, how do you do this? How do I do that? How do I scan my images in? And this is how I learned Photoshop. This was back in early 90s. So I think it was Photoshop 1.5. We had a 300 DPI scanner that took about 2 hours to scan a 300 DPI, but it was fantastic to learn, and I knew already about camera ready artwork. So the fact that I was actually going to litho presses and sitting there looking at them load the press, and how the artwork goes from, you photographing, taking something on your camera to scanning it high res with drum scanners. How do you place it into the artwork? How does it become a color separation? All these things became quite important to me now that I'm doing the old processes. I worked for the studio for a couple of years, and my father convinced me that I should move back to El Salvador because the peace had been signed and the economy was booming. So I did. And I moved back in April of 94. And in August of 94, while he was playing tennis in the club one day, he had a heart attack and passed away.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So I'm the oldest of the family. So I thought, I kind of have to stay here and support my mom. And so I did. I stayed there for 6 years in El Salvador, and I had a pre-press service bureau where we do color separations, and I also started doing a lot of commercial photography, which was fantastic. I learned about commercial photography where in El Salvador, such a small market, you couldn't really specialize. So one day you could be photographing the interior of a bank. The next day you could be photographing a catalog, for some jeans on the beach. The next day you could be photographing in studio a bottle of Coca-Cola. And I did everything. And it was all film. There was no digital. So you learn how to become pretty decent at, a lot of different aspects of subjects in photography. So there came a point in 2000 where I got a phone call from a friend of mine who was the accessories editor for W Magazine in New York, fashion magazine. And she said, look, they're photographing, they want to do an editorial in El Salvador. Would you be willing to assist? I said, I would love to. That would be amazing. And it was one of these points that I said to myself, something, there is a world out there bigger than El Salvador, and I would love to explore this, and I would like to see if my photography or my work is good enough to be out there. And I knew I wanted to specialize in maybe fashion and beauty. I wasn't 100% sure, but so I found a course in Paris and I found one in New York. The course in New York was filled up and the course in Paris wasn't. So I went to a place called Speos in Paris. So I went to Paris with the idea of maybe coming back to the US. After graduation, I was approached by Parsons School of Design to run their darkroom. Parsons School of Design is a university based in New York, quite famous, and they had a Paris campus. They needed a lab assistant, so I said I would love to do it. And so I started helping run the lab there for 3 days a week. The rest of the time I was either assisting photographers or doing my own testing with modeling agencies. So it was like almost a 7-day work in photography for me. I loved it. It was honestly no days off, everyday photography. It was there that I met a photographer called Stephen Lyon. I started assisting Stephen and became one of his first assistants. We traveled all over the place. And there I learned more about photography, dealing with clients. And it was one of these relationships where I helped him with everything. As an assistant, I think people misunderstand when you become a first assistant to one of these photographers, had the keys to his house, had the pin to his debit card, and I would help anything from picking up some groceries one day and walking the dog to obviously the photography aspects of it, And so you become, a really the right-hand man for these photographers. And you get to learn so much. So after a few years, I think it was 2003, Parsons said to me, look, the European Union is cracking down on us, on people hiring foreigners. So we're not really 100% sure if we can get you a visa. So I said, don't worry about it. My idea was to move back to the US. So I'll just do that. And I moved back to the US in December, and in February of 2004, I met one of the owners of Tony & Guy. They have salons all over the world. And he said, look, we're starting a studio in London called Bedhead Studio, which is one of our products, which I knew very well. And we're looking for some people to help us out. Would you be interested? And I said, well, sure, I'd love to try it out. So 3 months later, I was back in Europe. I was in London. I started working for Tony & Guy. They were one of the first people using digital photography commercially. So I remember we had like a 16 megapixel back, Kodak back, and everything looked really digital back then. So my job was to make it look like it was shot on film almost. Like I was in charge of doing all their post production, sometimes shooting as well with them. And it was fantastic. I worked with them for 11 years. So I can't, fault that. It was a great journey with TG and the Tony and Guy. I feel like I'm talking a lot, Mara. I don't.
It's
I'm not
okay.
getting.
It's okay.
So afterwards, I decided to go freelance. The company was bought out by a big conglomerate, and it is a fantastic company. It was just one of those things where I felt, look, I didn't come here to work for a massive conglomerate company. I didn't move to Europe for that, and I kind of want to start pursuing my own thing. And it was then that Stephen Lyon, who I was assisting in Paris, said, look, I have a gallery opening in Paris that's a part of a group exhibition, and it's a platinum palladium prints only. And he said, I have 2 prints, and I'd love for you to come. So I did. And for the life of me, I could not figure out how these prints were made. It really got me thinking, well, I need to find this out. I need to do some research. I found a workshop in Derby with Richard Freestone, I think he was, and he's retired now. And I said, I need to go. I need to go find out how these things are done. And once I did, it was just love at first sight. I mean, I was like, this is what I'm meant to do. I love this. I bought some chemistry. I'll be honest with you, I started doing cyanotypes because I thought to myself, well, I can't really afford platinum because platinum relative to other processes is the most expensive. And so I thought I'm going to start stockpiling some of the chemistry and the supplies. However, cyanotype is one of these chemistries that it's great to experiment. I love the look of the blue. Not everybody does, I know. Okay, but I love the Prussian blue. And I thought to myself, I'd love to get more into cyanotypes just because it will get me used to coding, to get consistent coatings. I had a small flat in London, so I was developing it in the bathtub. I had bought one of these lamps that's made for growing plants indoors, like a UV lamp, and my cyanotypes were taking about 2 hours to expose. And so I would have that on a boom in my living room while I was wearing sunglasses and watching a movie in my room while my living room was exposing cyanotypes, and it was amazing. And so that's how I got into the alternative processes, doing cyanotypes really. So, and I still do cyanotypes. I love cyanotypes because they're so versatile. There's so many different ways of doing them. It is accessible to anyone because I think for 20 quid, you can get about 200 mils of chemistry, even on Amazon. You can buy all this stuff on Amazon. Do them outside on a sunny day with 2 pieces of glass or a clip frame you can buy from Amazon. So if you want to get started on cyanotypes, I have my 4-year-old daughter loves cyanotypes. She has a little box where she goes and collects and puts everything in a little box, and then she makes the chemigrams, and it's magic to her, just like it was magic to me.
Yeah, I always call cyanotypes the gateway drug to alternative photography.
Yes.
Always the way in. Yeah.
That's kind of my story in a nutshell, I guess. Hope I didn't bore you.
Yeah. No, absolutely not. Although I am curious how you ended up in the northeast of England.
Okay, so this is a good one. My partner was born and raised in Chester Street, which is in between Newcastle and Durham. She is a makeup artist. When I was working with TG, we used to photograph quite a lot of the salons that would carry the product, and she was working with one of the salons. So when they came down, that's how we met. So a lot of the times when we worked together, I would hire her. So we've been together for about 12 years now, I think. She actually had moved to London. After about 8 years together, we decided we wanted to have a baby. And I thought to myself, 2 freelancers living in London in a small flat with a newborn, we need some family, we need some help.
Yeah.
So I said, look, why don't we move up to the northeast for a year or two? We'll still keep the flat in London and we'll just go back and forth as need be for work. And so this was in December of 2019. As you know, 4 months later, we got locked down for COVID. And that pretty much changed everything. After a couple of years living here, we're like, well, we don't actually need to move back to London. We love it up here. It's a complete different lifestyle. I miss London. I will admit that I don't miss living in London. The everyday hustle and bustle of going, waiting for the tube or waiting for a bus when it's raining.
Yeah, I lived in central London, sort of zone 1, zone 2 for 7 years. It's nice to go back occasionally, but I don't miss living there.
Yeah.
I really don't.
I miss the galleries and the museums, but Newcastle's got some great art scene. I don't miss it that much. I still love exploring Newcastle. I still don't know all about Newcastle. I've only been here for 5 years, and those 5 years have been mostly we're locked out for a couple of years, pretty much.
I mean,
But that's
I
how,
grew up here in the Northeast, and then I moved down south. And I've been back for 11 years now, and I'm still finding out new places in the Northeast. There must be so
really.
much more here.
There's so much to
So,
explore here. I mean, for us, we're an hour and a half from the Lake District, 20 minutes from the beach. You're probably closer to the beach than I am, but I'm 20 minutes.
yes.
So Northumberland's gorgeous. We have the Peak District's not that far away. York's not far away. So we're kind of in the middle of everywhere, and I absolutely love it.
Actually, during lockdown, when I was out sort of walking the dog, the number of people that I bumped into who had been living down south and come up here and got stuck here for lockdown, and then they were like, "We're staying. We're
Exactly.
staying here. This
That's
is it.
what
We're sold. Yeah, we just need to get rid of the properties down south and get up here."
Yes.
And I'm like, "Don't tell everybody; they'll all come." But
That's when we have nice weather.
But there you go. So you've ended up setting up RJ Printlabs.
So this place where I'm at now, it's an 800 square foot warehouse that we actually got in 2018. The opportunity came about, and we decided because the lab wasn't really started to print for other people. It was actually started just to print my own personal work. It was like my hobby, and so we found this warehouse that back then, I think there's a couple of them now available, but they didn't come around so often. We're in an industrial estate that's actually owned by County Durham, so it's a lot less expensive than London. I think I'm paying a fourth of the price of what I would have paid for London in London. So I thought to myself, well, let's get it. We'll turn it into a lab, and whenever it's slow in London, I'll just drive up. So what I would do is, if I didn't have anything to do for 2-3 days in London, I would drive up, stay with my partner's parents. I would come to print every day, and then drive back down. It didn't start out to be a commercial venture or to print for other people or to do workshops even. It wasn't until the pandemic that all my commercial work as a photographer, because I still do commercial work, photographically, we decided this is one of the ways that we can actually start generating some kind of income. And so, as you know, I can send you a file, print a negative, make a print, and then post it to you. So I was making print I think I sent prints to Australia, Patagonia in Argentina, Chicago, LA, Miami, New York. I still print and send prints all over the world. But that's kind of how it started because of the pandemic. It kind of pushed me to do that. And then when it started to open up a little bit, people started asking about workshops. And what we would do is just take a test the night before, share the results. And if you were okay, come on in, we'll wear a mask or not wear a mask, whatever. But at least it was doable, and that's how it started, RJ Print Lab.
I love it. I think the more people that we can get hands-on experiencing these fantastic processes, the better.
I agree.
Completely and utterly the better. Yeah.
It's magic. And when people look at I post quite a lot of videos on my Instagram. And people are like, how do you do this? How can this be done from you can literally take a picture on your iPhone, send me the file, and I'll make you a print using a process that's been around since the very beginning of photography. And that alone, the potential of that really blew my mind when I first saw it, And then obviously you start doing some research about the history, and especially in platinum palladium print, how Irving Penn made platinum palladium what it is today. And he was one of the first people who was enlarging negatives. So as you know, everything we do is 1-to-1. So you need, if you're going to make an A4 print, you need an A4 negative. And so Irving Penn photographed with a I think it was a Rolly, so it's a 2.25, 2.5 negative. So he started using graphic arts machinery to enlarge his negatives, and he was one of the first ones to start experimenting with that. So, and now it's exactly what I do here is I create my own negative using an Epson and some acetate. If you send me a file, I can create pretty much up to about 22 by 30 inches, so 56 by 76 centimeters print. And I specialize in platinum palladium print, but I do have some clients that like the cyanotypes or salt prints, mostly the metal processes. So these are all metal processes. So cyanotype is based with iron, salt print is silver, platinum and palladium. Van Dyke Brown's a combination of iron and silver.
So just to clarify for anyone listening who's not familiar with these processes, what you're essentially doing is you're taking a digital file. From that, you're creating digital negative. So you're creating a negative from the digital file, and then you're contact printing, which is
Correct.
where the 1-to-1 comes in. And the difference is the chemistry, essentially, between the processes.
Exactly. So you're basically creating a cocktail of chemistry. Whether if it's cyanotype, as you know, it's based on iron. Okay, let's clarify this a little bit simpler, maybe for people. When you talk about alternative processes, they're all based on historical processes. Not everything is historical, because people sometimes misunderstand that everything that you do in an alternative process is historical, but it's not. I think there's some, from the very beginning of photography, one of the first ones was salt printing. Henry Fox Talbot figured out that silver nitrate can be sensitized and creates an image. Then he figured out that it has something to hold on to, like salt, it would stay. And so, and they realized the fixer and all that. But salt printing is one of the basic ones. Cyanotype is another basic one. Platinum is a basic one. There's differences in these, and these are all the metal processes known as because they use metals. Then there's pigment processes like carbon transfer, gum bichromate, and there's a couple of other ones that I've read and heard about that use pigment as well. And it basically uses a sensitizer to harden either gelatin or gum arabic and leaves a pigment print, and then you can create different color. Have you ever experimented with the pigment processes?
I haven't. I've seen them done. I came close to having a go at the gum bichromate, but I can't remember why. There was a reason why I didn't end up doing it at the time. Predominantly, I've stuck more around silver nitrate, silver chloride, the ions, cyanotypes.
So for cyanotypes, I love the idea of toning as well, which it's called toning, but in reality, it's more like dyeing, because it is cotton papers, and you're basically using the same techniques as when you dye clothes. I'll tell you what's the easiest one to do, and I always say, because I'm sure you've come across this. Blue is not everyone's cup of tea. Okay, the cyanotypes, you either love them or you hate them. And I always say, well, even if you don't like them, you can tone them. So it's the best and easiest way to get into it. However, if you want to go a little bit step above, the Van Dyke Brown is pretty much a mixture of silver nitrate, so it's salt and cyanotype, and iron, and so you get the chocolate brown print, which some people will find a little bit more attractive. So I would say, if you don't like cyanotypes, the cost-wise, it's not very much more. Silver nitrate you can still buy pretty cheaply. I think it's like £1 a gram now, something like that. So it's not that far-fetched, because a lot of people don't want to invest any kind of money into this, because they don't know whether they like it or not. And unfortunately, as much as I love platinum, I do realize that it is the most expensive relatively to the other ones. To me, it is still the king. It is still, you still get, and it is one of the most reliable. Like, control all your variables. To me, it is still one of the most reliable ones. Because there are times where something's happening with cyanotype, and you're like, "What the heck just happened?" But I like it. Some kind of contamination happened. I don't know what happened, but and so. It is.
Yeah, I had that with the lumen print, and I made several. I was doing them a couple of years ago with the snowdrops, so contact printing of flowers.
I think I may have seen them. Did you post some of them?
Quite possibly, yeah. So I did about 2 or 3. I think it was. They came out exactly as I imagined, in the tones, the sort of pinky browns, and then this one came out, and it turned blue and orange.
Why?
And I was like, wow. Yeah. So the only thing I could think was somehow that bath got contaminated, because I have not been able to reproduce it. And it's devastating, because it's the most beautiful print I've ever made. And I don't even stand a chance of reproducing.
Embrace them. Embrace all these unexpected results.
So I'm guessing from what you've been saying that platinum's your favorite.
I still think platinum is my favorite, yes. Definitely, by far. Only because I find it quite reliable. I think as a photographer, if you've ever embraced your black and white printing, I don't know of any photographer that does black and white that's never heard of Ansel Adams, okay? So Ansel Adams was known for his zone system. So he could pre-visualize a print. He would pre-visualize, and he had 3 books called The Camera, the Negative, and the Print, which is basically pre-production, production, and post-production, and you visualizing that print. And you knowing exactly where your highlights are going to hit, where your shadows are going to hit, where your midtones are going to be, and where you're going to have detail, right? And with platinum and digital photography, you can pretty much visualize a print and know exactly how that print is going to look like. I can't do that on a silver gelatin print because I grew up with master printers. So one of my teachers at Spells was George Fabre, who used to print for Kudelka and what's the other French photographer? Not Robert Doisneau, the other
Henri
one.
Cartier-Bresson.
Henri Cartier-Bresson. So he used to print for Henri Cartier-Bresson and Kudelka. And what I saw him do in a darkroom was complete magic. He would take this negative and almost shoot light with his hands and then take out the filter, put in another filter, shoot light in another way. And I saw him turn a crap 35 millimeter negative into a beautiful print. And it takes a lot of skill and a lot of determination and a lot of experience to be able to do that. However, when you have a tool like Photoshop and you can basically create your highlights and lowlights, you can place them wherever you want them to be, you can create your own digital negative. I have a lot of control of what I can do. And Platinum is reliable to a certain point. So I can create a print however I like them. And I think this is ultimately the goal of most black and white photographers, to be able to pre-visualize a print and be able to have it in your head and then create it. As much as I embrace experimental photography and I love it, there is a point where you know exactly how you want this print to look like. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense to me. I know a lot of the people who come more from the art background might disagree.
So cyanotypes are another one that I love because it is reliable. Once you tone them, that goes out of the window because, depending on how long you live in the toner, depending on what kind of toner it goes. But that I embrace that as well. You see, I have a couple of clients that love toned cyanotypes, and I would probably print cyanotypes at least once or twice a month. But I think ultimately that's what to me the darkroom is all about. The reason I find that you've had this uptick in the alternative processes is that people are a little bit disillusioned with a workflow of digital photography where you can just hit a button, you can create 10 exact same duplicates. Even as reliable as Platinum is, I know that there is differences in the way you coat every single time. So I can't really create exactly the same print. Yes, I can come close, but I will always tell people if you're making an addition, they'll never look exactly the same. There's been a couple of schools of thoughts about the brush strokes, and I'm not sure what your thoughts are on this. Maybe you can share them with us, because I don't remember seeing brush strokes in your prints, but I may be wrong.
I have done some with brush strokes and some without.
So basically, when you're coating paper, some people use brush, which I do. Some people use a rod, coating rod, but you always overextend the emulsion more than what your image will be. And so you can either decide to leave them showing or you can mask them out. So the question is, or the debate has always been, do you leave the brush strokes on or do you have clean edges? And I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I have and do both. And it tends to be, my decision on which one tends to be based on what I want final piece to be, how I'm visualizing that final piece. I like both effects.
See, a lot of people are mistakenly calling it effects because it isn't really an effect. It is a decision whether you decide to show them or not.
Yeah, it's an effect as in whether or not I have clean lines around the edge or whether or not I allow the hand of the maker to be shown.
Right.
And that's the difference. To me, if you include them, that shows the handmade aspect of them. It shows the hand of the maker. And I really like that aspect. But there are other images where that in itself won't enhance the image. It may detract from it, in which case I won't do that. So I tend to make the decision individually based on the image. If it's going to end up as a reproduction, I'll usually steer away from allowing the brush strokes to be seen.
Right.
Because then I kind of feel a little bit that it's pretending to be something that it isn't. Right. But if it's only ever going to be an original, then I quite like to be able to see them. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at the computer, and behind the computer are two originals that I have, two large originals, and they don't have them because I knew I was going to do another process on top of the cyanotypes to create another effect, and it wasn't going to work with that there. And because I knew how they were going to be framed and how they were then going to be displayed. Personally, I think it should be evaluated each time based on the individual image and what the vision of the photographer, the artist is, and what they're trying to create. I don't know if that aligns with what you think or not.
No, I actually agree with you because, I've seen many, many debates about this because it's one of those debates that always comes up in the forums. And for example, Mike Ware is very adamant about the ridiculousness, he calls it, of people showing brushstrokes which can be easily replicated digitally. He also claims that if you leave brushstrokes on, how do you know if the print has actually cleared properly? I can see his point. I understand. That's what he says. So in
Yes.
platinum, if print hasn't cleared properly, it's got a bit of a yellowness to it from the ferric oxalate, right? How can you see properly? I don't agree with him. I also know that I've yet to see a Nerving pen print with brushstrokes on it, and I think the reason is because it actually does detract from the subject. As you mentioned earlier, if it doesn't add anything to the image, why put them there, right? I am of the opinion, I was told by one of the galleries that I show at, to leave the brushstrokes because then it gives the buyer a choice. If they don't like them, you can always mask them out. You can always put a passepartout and mask them out, right? And so my partner Jenny says to me, "Why, if it was my work, I would actually leave them, but I wouldn't show them with it. And then if someone asks, is it handmade? Yes, look, here's the maker. Here's, because a lot of people think that if you leave the brushstrokes, it shows that it's a handmade item. Uh, I find that that's not 100. It's as we spoke earlier. They can be digitally recreated, and most if it's a collector that's buying your image, they don't really care about the brushstrokes. They know what a platinum palladium is, or they know what a cyanotype is. Okay.
If people are still listening after we've ranted on for all this time, so if people want to find out more about RJ Printlabs or perhaps your own personal work, where can they find you online? Where can they find out more?
The best in social media. Instagram is where I post most of it's, I pretty much post weekly, at least once or twice a week. I'll post something that's going on. There are times where I'll go quiet, and it's because I'm either working with a photographer that doesn't want to go on social media because they're working on some kind of exhibition that they, it's still a bit hush hush, or I'm working on my personal project that I still haven't decided what to do. It's the only time I go a little bit quiet, and it usually won't last for more than a few days. So if you follow me on my social media at RJ Printlab, you can see what's going on. There's also my website. My website will give you information about workshops, or if you want me to print something for you. So if you want to come visit, you're more than welcome to. I make a pretty decent coffee, I've been told, and I've learned how to make English tea. So
there you go. You can find the show notes for this episode, including Roberto's details and links, over on our website at isthatreallyphotography.com. If you'd like some more Is That Really Photography in your life, don't forget to subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. Love your social media? Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. But most of all, don't forget to have fun creating images with light in whatever form you enjoy.